We're going to look at this particular story where the National Conference on Protection of Children Against Sexual Violence has kicked off here in Juba. And of course, earlier, our reporter has been looking at that particular story.
Well, one of the speakers on the first day of the conference was the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, Pramila Patten, who reminded the government of South Sudan of its primary responsibility to protect children against sexual violence.
Let's go right about now and, of course, listen to her as she addresses, of course, the public on this particular issue.
I'm here to signal my support to the government of South Sudan on this very urgent issue, which is the increase in sexual violence against children. So I'm here to support the efforts of the government in addressing this problem, in acknowledging that there is an increase in the number of cases of sexual violence against children, boys and girls, and to address it. I think it's a very commendable effort because I cover between 20 to 25 conflict countries where year in, year out we have data in spite of the fact that sexual violence, conflict-related sexual violence in general is chronically underreported, and even worse when it comes to sexual violence against children, that the government of South Sudan is not on a denial mode and has been extremely open in tackling the issue. In organizing this conference, I think they have sent a very strong signal about the political will to address the issue.
Mm-hmm. Talking about the sexual violence against children and about this conference, what are your recommendations for the organizers?
Well, first and foremost, to remind the government of South Sudan of its primary responsibility to protect children, boys and girls, against sexual violence. And indeed, I have made a number of recommendations. Firstly, commending the efforts of the government to work with a range of partners. It's the primary responsibility of the government to have a response and to work with a broad range of stakeholders and actors, including the children themselves. And I was very pleased to see that space was made for the voices of children to be heard. For me, I have the deep and very firm conviction that this is a preventable crime, that it's not collateral damage. It's never an accident. Sexual violence perpetrated against adults or children is never an accident. It's not an inevitable byproduct of conflict. So my first recommendation is really to boost prevention efforts. And I also my office launched a prevention framework last year, which I have offered to roll out in South Sudan. I have made the offer to the government of South Sudan. So that prevention framework could constitute a roadmap in terms of the efforts of the government to prevent sexual violence against children. Secondly, in terms of the response efforts, I have stressed the importance of having a very holistic approach, having a survivor-centered approach in terms of understanding the experience of children as victims of sexual violence, the impact of sexual violence on children, and meeting the needs of children, whether it is the medical attention that they require or the mental health services that they require. Mm-hmm. And I wish to highlight the importance of having age and gender responsive and tailored measures to the needs of children. The voices, it's not true to say that children do not have a voice. I think it's critical that their voices are amplified and that their participation is enhanced. They should be part of the solutions, and children should also be seen as co-creators of solutions. South Sudan is a party to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and I think the full implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child should be a priority of the government in addressing sexual violence against them. It's also important that the voices of children heard in the context of peace-building efforts in the country. And as we heard the children themselves express this morning, the need for perpetrators to be held accountable and for the culture of impunity to be reversed, also as a deterrent. And I did highlight this morning that unfortunately for too long, justice for children victims of sexual violence has been neglected, and there has been somehow a lack of efforts. It may be some resistance or reluctance on the part of justice actors to involve children in the justice processes. There is a lack of expertise to deal with children victims of sexual violence on the part of investigators, prosecutors and judges, and I think this is a major gap. And I heard it in Oslo at the conference on children in armed conflict. I heard it this morning from the children of South Sudan claiming justice. But I go beyond justice. I think children deserve justice and reparations for the harms that they suffer.
Of course, they do. Connecting these recommendations to the commitment of the government, the Minister of Gender spoke about the commitment of the government regarding protection of children from sexual violence. Is there anything that you would like to add to that? And what are your expectations from this conference?
Well, my office stands ready to support the work of the Ministry of Gender, Child and Social Welfare, and I just had a very long meeting with the Minister, and I have extended the support of my office to her ministry and proposed to her that we roll out together the prevention framework, which I launched last year, and to prepare a tailored implementation plan on the prevention of sexual violence against children and the protection of the children in terms of the response. I have also addressed with her the need to also look at the legislative framework because we cannot talk about justice and accountability if there isn't a sophisticated legislative framework in place. And I know that there are huge gaps in the legislative framework when it comes to, for example, sexual violence against boys. There is a lack of legislative provision for the protection of victim and witnesses. So there are major gaps which needs to be addressed and which my office, through my team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence, stand ready to support her efforts. And I have also highlighted to her the interest of my office to support the work of her ministry of the government of South Sudan on the plight of children born of rape, often from adolescent girls, and that there is a huge gap when it comes to protecting these children who in most cases are stateless with no rights whatsoever and really set on a trajectory of poverty and more discrimination, and who get entangled in a cycle of further violence and abuse, and extended to her the support of my office. And she has expressed interest to work very much on this issue, which I encourage her to do. So the political will of the government of South Sudan on the prevention and sexual violence against children and their protection must be translated into very concrete action.
UN Special Representative of the Secretary General Pramila Patten speaking to my colleague Shaden Ganam about the protection of children against sexual